In the late 1950s, the battle for civil rights was fought in the classrooms of the South. The Supreme Court had ruled in a case called Brown versus Board of Education that segregated schools were unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. Many Southerners saw the decision as an attack on their heritage and traditions. The battle lines were drawn.
Following the decision of the Supreme Court, you would have been well advised to let things move along gradually for a while, but you can't overthrow the prejudices of 300 years overnight.
You can't, or maybe you can't, override prejudice overnight. But the Emancipation Proclamation was issued in 1863, 90-odd years ago. I believe in gradualism. I also believe that 90-odd years is pretty gradual.
Units of the National Guard have been and are now being mobilized with the mission to maintain or restore the peace and good order of this community.
The Arkansas National Guard ringed the school with orders to admit only the white students. It shocked the country. State troops were now being used to prevent enforcement of federal law. In mid-September, the president and the governor had a meeting at Eisenhower's vacation home in Newport, Rhode Island.
The president thought that he had persuaded Governor Faubus to go back and allow the black children to enter the high school peaceably. It was quite a surprise to him. He felt let down when Governor Faubus decided against allowing the black children to enter the high school.
Eisenhower had convinced Faubus that ultimately the state could not resist federal authority. Faubus changed his tactic. He simply removed the National Guard, leaving only city police, in an explosive situation as the Little Rock Nine entered Central High School.
We entered the side of the building.
We've just got a report here on this end that the students are in. That's right. Turn the camera down that way, Don, down there. You can see from here some of the action occurring down there.
The mob was getting past the wooden sawhorses because the policemen would no longer fight their own in order to protect us. And so someone made a suggestion that if they allowed the mob to hang one kid, they could then get the rest out. And a gentleman, whom I believe to be the assistant chief of police, said, "How are you going to choose? You're going to let them draw straws." He said, "I'll get them out." And we were taken to the basement of this place. And we were put into two cars, grayish blue colored Fords. And the man instructed them, he said, "Once you start driving, do not stop."
The rioting was headline news. The nation and the world saw unmistakably the face of resistance. Finally, President Eisenhower realized he had to act, and he did quickly. That night, he sent in the paratroopers of the 101st Airborne Division.
An extreme situation has been created in Little Rock. This challenge must be met, and with such measures as will preserve to the people as a whole their lawfully protected rights. If resistance to the federal court order ceases at once, the further presence of federal troops will be unnecessary, and a blot upon the fair name and high honor of our nation in the world will be removed. Mob rule can not be allowed to override the decisions of our courts.
When we got into the Jeep, into the station wagon rather, and the convoy that went from Mrs. Bates' house to the school that had a Jeep in front, a Jeep behind. They both had machine gun mounts, and then the whole school was ringed with paratroopers and helicopters hovering around, we marched up the steps with this circle of soldiers with bayonets drawn. I figured that we had really gone into school that day. And walking up the steps that day was probably one of the biggest feelings I've ever had.
And there was a feeling of pride and hope that, yes, this is the United States. Yes, there is a reason I salute the flag. And it's going to be okay, you know.
Nearly 3 months into the trial, a hushed courtroom anxiously awaits the verdict.
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Stacy C. Kuhn, not guilty.
3 of the accused officers are acquitted of all charges.
It was the beating that symbolized the lawlessness and brutality of the Los Angeles riot. Truck driver Reginald Denny dragged from his rig and nearly killed.
This is probably one of the worst incidents we've seen all night. You see this Bronco here. People surrounded the car. They dragged the driver out.
And beat him bloody. We don't know at this point. But look at this. It's a gang of people. Now, here's a guy apparently came to his aid here. And there are a couple of people you'll see. This is a Good Samaritan story. Finally, a couple of people took this poor guy out of the area and escorted him out of danger. Now, we don't know if this guy is someone who was one of the original assailants, because this is just bedlam down here, and it's hard to sort out who was doing what.
We should mention there have been several fires started in the area.
Those simmering racial tensions ignite after the Rodney King verdict. KABC television captures these men apparently taking matters into their own hands.
As a result of the not guilty verdicts for Stacy Kuhn, Lawrence Powell, Timothy Wind, and Theodore Bersenio, the 4 officers accused of beating motorist Rodney King. There's still 1 charge pending against Officer Lawrence Powell. That came down at 3 o'clock this afternoon. We had a lot of people react to it. We had a lot of pleas for calm. We had a peace meeting at the AME Church in South Central Los Angeles tonight at 7 o'clock. And then we had this. And this has been going on for the better part, Ann, I guess, of about 4 hours.
Yeah, I think basically you could say that all hell broke loose in these inferno fires as we've watched one building after another burn to the ground.
Here we are about 40 miles from downtown Los Angeles.
As we were driving, as I mentioned, down the Interstate 10 here going west, on the other side of the freeway we can also see a car on fire. We saw another building on fire, and it's just on either side of the freeway, just fires here and there.
Can't really tell the story of Jewish life in the South without telling the story of the Leo Frank case. In 1913, a little girl by the name of Mary Fagan, 13 years old, wanted to collect her pay at the National Pencil Company. She goes to the pencil factory, collects her pay, and the last person who admits to seeing her alive is the pencil factory superintendent, Leo M. Frank. Mary Fagan comes in. He admits to giving her pay, and that is the last time anybody really admits to seeing Mary Fagan alive. She's discovered in the early morning hours that day by the night watchman Newt Lee in the basement. He immediately calls the police come, they march through the basement of the pencil factory, literally destroying the crime scene, and discover that it is indeed a white child by the name of Mary Fagan. After the police investigate numerous people who were at the pencil factory that day, they zero in on Leo Frank. The key witness against Leo Frank is Jim Conley, a man by the name of Jim Conley, who's the sweeper at the pencil factory. While Leo is in custody, somebody reports that Jim Conley was seen washing out a bloody shirt. Conley, when he was questioned by the police, changed his story 3 times. What he described at the police headquarters was that Leo Frank was really a womanizer, that he accosted young girls at the factory on a regular basis. He says that on this particular day, on this particular Saturday, like a lot of Saturdays, he had asked Conley to stand as a lookout for him at the factory, and that he was going to have a little meeting, a rendezvous with Mary Fagan. Something went wrong, and Leo kills Mary Fagan. At which point, Leo Frank then asks Conley to help dispose of the body. Jim Conley becomes the key witness for the prosecution, and his testimony at trial really is the key point of the trial. It rests on whether the defense can break Conley on the witness stand. Well, Jim Conley stuck to his story. He just stuck to his story. The jury ultimately believes Conley, and the jury's only out for a short time and comes back with a guilty verdict. Leo gets sentenced to death. He's taken back to the city jail. The appeal process starts. It takes most of 1914. It goes through all the state courts, the appellate courts, and eventually there's no more recourse all the way to the Supreme Court. That appeal is also denied, and at this point it's left up to Governor Slayton to make a decision. It falls into his hands. Does he commute the sentence or let it go? So he commutes his sentence from death to life in prison. The night before he announces the commutation, Leo's scurried off by train to the state prison farm in Milledgeville. A conspiracy is being brewed in Marietta. A conspiracy of the men who are really the most prominent individuals in Marietta. You have a judge, you have attorneys, you have big manufacturers, and these are really the elite of Marietta who decide that the sentence of death should have been carried out, that this was a total miscarriage of justice, and they decide to take the law into their own hands. So they conspire with the State Prison and Paroles Board. They drive to the prison, they cut telephone wires, they don't have to fire one shot, they go into the dormitory room, or the room where Leo Frank was being held, and Leo was taken out. He was driven back to Marietta, and he was